Here we go with another Greenhouse season recap as we prepare for Season 5, All-Stars. Today, we're recapping the Greenhouse Season 2. Let's get started. Once again, we had 13 new players join the Greenhouse game. Let's go through them. Up at the top left, we have two longtime All-Stars of our games. Jessica, who won our 4th Survivor season, and Brody, who has played 1 million times. Jessica's known for her bubbly personality, while Brody is known for being evil, more or less. At the top right are 3 players who have frequented our Big Brother seasons. We have Laura from Big Brother 17 and 18, Patrick from Big Brother 11 and 17, and Maddie from Big Brothers 17 and 19. Laura's known for being no-nonsense, Patrick's known for being pretty shifty and a bit of a schmoozer, and Maddie's iconic because she's a huge Harry Styles fan. I believe that's been her fun fact every time she's played. We live. In the middle are Carlin and Clyde from our recent Survivor seasons. Carlin played in Survivor Hidden Valley and placed 5th and was robbed. And Clyde was the merge boot of Survivor Trial by Fire after he made a lot of waves in the game. At the bottom right are 2 of our new players. Johnny, this is his first game, and Gabby, this is her first game. Both of them are medical students. Johnny used to run a small business. He operated a snow cone stand for a long time, so he felt confident in his ability to run the funds of this game. Gabby was voted most likely to be on reality TV in high school, so good for her. At the bottom left, we have 4 people from Theater Baton Rouge. They perform together often. They're the source of a lot of comedy throughout the season. They're iconic. It's Clay, Victoria, Lily, and Caitlin. Lily's known for being a director on the scene. She's a strong leader. Caitlin's the funniest person I know. Clay and Victoria are roommates and both have huge personalities. They're taking it pretty seriously. For the first Greenhouse challenge, players had to publicly vote to eliminate one person each round. The eliminated player would then drag people alongside them. In the first round, Clyde volunteered to get voted out. And after he was voted out, he dragged Clay, Laura, and Gabby. Brody was pretty heavily targeted at the start of the challenge. However, he was the only one vocally asking to enter the Greenhouse. Because no one wanted to start out the game with conflict, they pretty much let him walk to the top of this challenge. Johnny was eliminated and dragged Victoria and Lily. Lily spent most of the first game building an alliance with Victoria, Caitlin, Clay, and Johnny. Then Caitlin couldn't take the pressure of the challenge and offered to drop out, and she dragged Carlin, who Caitlin was trying to pull into the big alliance. And lastly, Patrick dropped out at 4th after the other 3 promised him safety. And Maddie, Jessica, and Brody entered the Greenhouse. For the first week, the players divided up to complete different seed hunts. Clyde was the only person to get the winter hunt, and he had to break a seed out of a block of ice. He did so successfully. Gabby had to complete a scavenger hunt and got the winning clue from Jessica. Lily, Laura, and Caitlin had to complete an anonymous dice race. Lily won the challenge, but Laura and Caitlin both thought each other were lying about losing the competition. This begins tension between the two that lasts the entire season. Patrick, Victoria, and Clay had to choose targets that they could get a bounty for. That ultimately didn't lead to too much plot-wise. But the main thing to know is that Lily began to form an alliance. She brought in the TBR people, Caitlin, Victoria, and Clay, and she worked hard on recruiting Johnny and Carlin. So consider them a 6 at the start of the game. So by nominations, 2 sides form. It's Lily's alliance on one side with Brody latched to them, and it's everyone else loosely grouped on the other side. Clyde, Gabby, and Jessica become pretty close, but they're not directly linked with Laura, Maddie, and Patrick. Carlin is also close to Patrick, and Carlin is close to Clay as well. Carlin's floating in the middle. Patrick and Brody are agreeing to work together and play the middle and keep each other safe as big strategic threats in the game, while everyone else is pretty staunchly on different sides of the house, with Lily being the most polar out of everyone. Maddie and Jessica nominated 3 people from Lily's alliance. In fact, the 3 core people from her alliance, Lily, Victoria, and Caitlin. You should note that Lily won 2 seeds at the Seed Immunity Challenge, so at this point, the 3 of them are rolling in seeds. And when it was time for the auction, Lily was easily able to accumulate 10 seeds in round 1 because of the way the different seed hunts went. In fact, this was such a dramatic move that we have since changed the rules for the Venus flytrap to increase the price at the start of the game. So this was a gag. I do want to note Brody and Patrick's relationship at this point. They're both worried because of the format of the game that they'll be taken out easily at the top 4. So they agree that if they go to the end together, at least one of them has to be able to make the final. Brody and Patrick agree that this Venus flytrap move will only help them because it gets rid of a big power that could target big players like them. And at the banishment ceremony, Lily banished Jessica, who was more or less the leader of the other side of the house. Moving forward, the non-Lily side of the game has a really difficult time getting organized. At the start of round 2, the standings are the same. You have Brody and Patrick in the middle, with Lily and her alliance on one side, and Maddie, Laura, Gabby, Clyde, and Carlin loosely on the other side. They're not organized. They don't realize that they need to get organized, and it's going to make them pay. I should also note that Carlin doesn't really love being on this side of the house. If anything, she counts herself as a number for Lily's group, though she does recognize that they need to pick off Lily's alliance eventually. For the greenhouse challenge, Johnny won the sunflower, Lily won the rose, and Gabby won the tulip. So for another week, Lily's alliance was in power. For the Seed Immunity Challenge, players were able to support each other to try to sponsor other players to the win. Clyde attempted to form an alliance with Laura, Patrick, and Gabby. However, they never really meet as a 4 and lock it down. Clyde says that he wants to give all of the alliance's support to Laura so that she can win immunity, while Clyde and Patrick can gun for 2 seeds. Whenever Clyde gave all of his support to Laura, he did it in front of Carlin, which turned Carlin off. In fact, Carlin is completely against Clyde moving forward. Laura and Caitlin begin to openly speak against each other, both in confessionals and to the other players. And ultimately, Laura wins immunity and Clay wins 2 seeds, while Clyde's faux pas with Carlin begins to spread to the rest of the cast. The thing is, when it was time for nominations, Laura was the main target of Lily's alliance because Caitlin's not really feeling her, and they're all intimidated by Laura's experience in the games. And also, Laura's a pretty blunt person, so I think that they found her more intimidating than they needed to. Johnny nominates Clyde and Victoria, while Lily nominated Maddie. The Maddie nomination was easy because Maddie previously nominated Lily. Clyde was nominated because Laura was no longer an option, and word was starting to spread about Clyde openly helping Laura win immunity, so he seemed to be the next best target. Victoria was nominated because Lily and Johnny decided that they didn't want to nominate 3 people from the other side. That way, they wouldn't feel motivated to get organized, just like Lily's side had done the round before. At the auction, Clyde was feeling safe. Clyde, Maddie, Gabby, Laura, Patrick, and Brody openly spoke about breaking up the Flytrap girls. That's Victoria, Lily, and Caitlin. Since Victoria was on the block, it seemed to be an easy vote to get Victoria out. Brody told the group that Clyde would be safe and that there were plenty of votes for Victoria. So as a result, Gabby decided to block members of her own alliance using her tulip power. However, because Brody wasn't actually with the group, Gabby's misplay of the tulip made her side lose the vote. And ultimately, it was Clyde who was banished at the banishment ceremony. Even though Gabby and Patrick wanted to keep Clyde, they didn't have the votes because Laura and Caitlin were blocked. If Gabby instead blocked, say, Carlin or Clay, they would have had the votes to keep Clyde. So ultimately, everyone's gagged and Clyde goes home. For round 3, it's again the same standings, but the non-Lily side of the game is getting smaller and smaller. Laura, Gabby, and Maddie are very close at this point. They trust Patrick a lot. Patrick is working on Carlin more. Specifically, he's trying to get her to turn on the Lily side of the game. And Carlin, while into it, doesn't want to make an enemy out of such a big side of the house. To this day, I still don't think Carlin's timing was correct. I think she should have moved here or last round during the Clyde boot. You're about to see how it plays out. For the Greenhouse Challenge, the players divided into two families and played Family Feud. Patrick was able to convince his family to give him Sunflower. He hoped to use it to swing things to favor his half of the house. At nominations, Patrick nominated Gabby in order to save face with his family and the other side. You have to remember at this point he's playing both sides, and the non-Lily side of the game is not very organized, so it's not the type of thing to really make a big stand, especially if he thinks he has the votes to get rid of Lily. Clay nominated Maddie, because at this point, Maddie's becoming an easy nomination to put up and keep in the game. She's a pawn. At the auction, there was a bidding war between Gabby and Lily. Patrick and Laura gave Gabby seeds, while Victoria, Caitlin, and Carlin contributed to Lily winning the uproot. So Lily won the uproot, and it was ultimately Gabby versus Maddie on the block. And because Gabby had been much more successful in the challenges, Gabby was unanimously voted out. So round 4, again, it's the same exact standings, but the Patrick half of the house is dwindling more and more and more, while the Lily side of the game is completely intact. This is the round where things change, because Brody decides to make a move. Basically, Brody's been fostering a relationship with Johnny and Clay specifically, and he wants to whittle down at Lily, Caitlin, and Victoria so that he can have a better shot at making it to the finals with Clay and Johnny specifically. So, moving forward, this is really a story of Brody jumping between the two sides. At this point in the series, we still have the daisy chain, which is a special elimination that happens at the top 10. The 11th place finisher grants someone immunity. Here, Gabby gave Laura immunity. And then there's a safety chain until one person is left unpicked. Lily was left unpicked at the end of this daisy chain. The unpicked player becomes a nominee, and they drag someone to the block with them. Here, Lily dragged Maddie, thinking it wouldn't offend anyone, and she had plenty of votes to stay regardless. I should note that the group planned for Lily to fall at the bottom. Caitlin has 2 banked votes at this point, and she wanted to make sure that she was going in the voting line so that she could use them for the alliance. At the auction, no one bid on anything, and it was down to Lily and Maddie on the block. Brody tells Johnny and Clay that he thinks it's time to flip on Caitlin, Victoria, and Lily. Ultimately, Johnny and Clay agree to the flip. They've been making good relationships with Patrick and Laura specifically, and they want to be able to center themselves in the game. If they ran to the end with Lily's alliance, Lily, Caitlin, and Victoria would be strong competitors to potentially whittle away at Johnny, Clay, and Brody. By turning on the Flytrap girls now, they'd win allies in the other side, and the other side would continue to target the Flytrap girls. This gave them effective immunity moving forward. Meanwhile, Caitlin and Brody played a game of chicken. Brody told Lily that Lily would be going home and that he would use his bank vote to make sure it happened. In doing the math, Lily, Caitlin, and Victoria thought that if Caitlin played both banked votes and if they kept Johnny and Clay's votes, they would win if Brody was actually bluffing. Which is the case, by the way. But ultimately, Clay and Johnny flipped, so Lily had no hope at all. Laura played her banked vote, but Brody did not play his. Brody let Laura waste hers while he held on to his. I should also note that Caitlin passed a banked vote to Johnny because she felt like she owed him one. In the standings, we have our first big shakeup. We have Laura, Maddie, Patrick, and Carlin on one side. Patrick's the centerpiece that's gluing these people together. The other 3 are not extremely organized. Brody, Clay, and Johnny are a strong trio at this point. Victoria and Caitlin are loyal to Johnny and Clay. However, they do feel separated and slighted after Lily's elimination. For the 5th Greenhouse Challenge, players voted on superlatives to give different players. Caitlin and Patrick were voted most deserving of detention, and they were forced to stay in the couch area for the entire nomination round. Laura and Brody won Sunflower and Rose, while Clay won 2 seeds. Victoria was upset that Clay took 2 seeds because their alliance needed the nomination power. If Laura had the sunflower, Victoria or Caitlyn were going to be nominated. And that's exactly what happened. Laura nominated Caitlyn. During Lily's elimination, Brody promised Caitlyn and Victoria that he would work with them moving forward, forming an alliance of 5 with them, Clay, and Johnny. He used the excuse that he promised Caitlyn and Victoria safety in the previous round and pretended that his hands were tied in nominating Carlin. However, Brody wanted to get rid of one of Patrick's most loyal numbers. That way, Patrick would be dependent on Brody. Additionally, Carlin was very close with Clay at this point, and by taking Carlin off the board, Clay would also be relying on Brody more than before. Nothing was purchased at the auction, and the votes fell down the party lines. The remaining members of Lily's alliance voted out Carlin, while the remaining members of Patrick's alliance voted out Caitlyn, and Carlin was banished by a vote of 3-2. And with Carlin's elimination, Brody put himself exactly in the center. Patrick, Laura, and Maddie began to solidify as a trio at this point. However, Patrick and Brody still trusted each other a ton, and Laura, if she had to pick a top 3, probably would have gone with Patrick and Brody at this point. Brody also has a final 3 with Johnny and Clay, and Victoria and Caitlyn are targets number 1 for Patrick's side, while Brody's trio with Johnny and Clay is going untouched completely. So the challenge was time betting. Patrick and Maddie won the nomination powers, and they put up their targets, Victoria and Caitlyn, as expected. This is the exact outcome that Brody wanted in forming the game this way. At this point, within the remaining members of Lily's alliance, there's a final 4 between Brody, Johnny, Clay, and Victoria. Clay, Johnny, and Victoria agreed to buy Uproot so that Caitlyn would stay on the block and they could get rid of Caitlyn and keep their top 4 intact. Clay won the Uproot and took Victoria off the block. Patrick nominated Johnny because he didn't want to nominate Brody at this point because they were close. Also, Clay didn't realize he could just discard the Uproot, which he would have done because Johnny is his final 2 at this point. And Johnny and Clay play up this mess up, and Johnny pretends to be upset with Clay because Johnny didn't have to be nominated, and it's Clay's quote-unquote paranoia that landed Johnny on the block. Johnny had no reason to be worried because Caitlyn was banished by a unanimous vote, and she iconically flips a table. You should go watch it. So here we are at the top 7. We have the top 4 alliance of Brody, Johnny, Clay, and Victoria, and a second top 4 alliance of Laura, Maddie, Patrick, and Brody. At the Greenhouse Challenge, members of each side win nominating power. Johnny wins the sunflower and nominates Maddie from the other side. Laura wins Rose and nominates Victoria from the other side. Nothing's bought at the auction, and this time Brody flips on his alliance with Victoria, Clay, and Johnny. Because Brody sent Victoria home, now Clay and Johnny had to be loyal to Brody all the way to the final 3. If Brody stuck with the final 4, Clay, Johnny, and Victoria planned to cut Brody at 4. So Brody anticipated that and turned his final 4 alliance into a final 3 alliance. At the top 6, it was 3 versus 3. It was Brody, Johnny, and Clay, who survived their shields in the Flytrap Girls, versus Patrick, Laura, and Maddie. I should also point out, at this point, Patrick has been pitching an all-male Final 4 with Brody, Johnny, and Clay. Brody and Patrick win Sunflower and Rose. Brody nominates Maddie, sticking with his alleged top 3 alliance, and Patrick nominates Johnny, sticking with his alleged top 3 alliance. Clay and Johnny have the most seeds in the game by far. Clay and Johnny were upset about Victoria's elimination, so Clay buys the Uproot, takes Johnny off, and secures immunity for both of them. And ultimately, Laura and Maddie were forced to be on the block together. And when it was time for the banishment, Clay and Johnny agreed that Laura was a much bigger threat than Maddie, so Laura went home in 6th place. At the top 5, things separated a bit more. Maddie was isolated at this point. Patrick was all in on the plan to go to the end with the guys, specifically Brody. And Johnny and Clay were focusing on themselves as a pair more than their trio with Brody. Once again, we had a daisy chain at the top 5. Patrick won the immunity challenge, and ultimately Maddie was unpicked during the daisy chain selection. Maddie dragged Brody, thinking his long-term shady game would make him an easy vote over Maddie, so close to the final. However, nobody budged, and they voted out Maddie. Even though Brody has dominated the game pretty commandingly, almost everyone in the game agrees that Brody's leaving a bad taste in the jury's mouths. Specifically, they're talking about him betraying Victoria. They're talking about him telling Lily to her face that she was going home. And he's not doing it with a ton of tact, with all the love for Brody. He's making people angry. So Johnny and Clay specifically are betting that they can beat Brody at the end, especially since Patrick has so many allies on the jury. At the top four, Brody, Clay, and Johnny solidified their final three. In the final four, the players used their remaining seeds to vote for someone to receive final immunity. Here, the group voted for Johnny to receive final immunity, and Johnny banished Patrick in fourth place. Also, I should note that Patrick thought that he was going to work with Brody here, but after Patrick gave Brody his seeds, Brody told Patrick that Patrick would be going home, and he refused to return Patrick's seeds to him. So again, another person Brody pissed off. In the finale, it was Brody versus Johnny versus Clay. Johnny and Clay's bet that Brody made too many jurors mad worked out because Brody only received 1 vote while Johnny and Clay tied with 3 votes each. So ultimately, it was up to Brody to break the tie at the end. And Brody voted for Clay to win the Greenhouse Season 2. Brody voted for Clay because of Clay's leadership in the alliance and Clay's ability to pivot between alliances a lot like Brody. Johnny was seen as a much more passive player in the game, and ultimately, this is how I would have voted too. So that's the Greenhouse Season 2. It was fun. It was much more polarized than Season 1, so I think it's a fun, different interpretation of the game. I just rewatched it. I thought it was a blast, so I don't know. There's a couple weeks until All-Stars, so why not dive in? You got time.